Welcome to another episode of Mystic Skeptic Radio. We're continuing our conversation with Raphael Gantshar, and we're going to be taking a different approach to what we discussed last week. We were talking about the attack on Iran, which some people feel is justified, some people think it's kind of unprecedented. And then I don't know if we call it the war with Iran because there's supposed to be a ceasefire, but now it's kind of tenuous. But I wanted to do a history of how we've handled anti-Semitism and other topics on the show to get Raphael an understanding of why are we still going on with this subject. So about 5 years ago, I wanted to have two people on my show. One was a professor of military history who's Jewish. His name is Jonathan Roth, and a guy who says that he's an ex-Jew. He is now very prominent guy in the anti-Israel groups. His name is Zach Foster, because they were going to talk from different perspectives about the whole Israel-Palestine conflict. And it was so difficult for me to come to terms with what we were going to discuss that we ended up not doing it. And the reason that it was painful for me to consider even doing it is that I knew both sides were going to say horrible things that were going to be detrimental to the conversation. And what I mean by that is that one side was going to say anything is justified for security, and the other guy was going to say, you guys are evil because you are the stronger party. And it was just going to go back and forth for an hour or two at each other's throats. And it wasn't going to help anything. It was just going to solidify everybody's perspective. And that's where we're at right now. The whole world feels like that. You have the conservative side, which now there's people even questioning any type of American involvement or Israeli involvement in foreign affairs, who is entrenched in this idea that security and complete eradication of the enemy is the only way. And then you got the other side that says, give peace a chance. And unless you are a utopian ultra pacifist, you are a Nazi, and that's it. There's nowhere else to go from there. So what we've done as we discuss the history of anti-Semitism, Jewish persecution throughout the centuries, the ongoing vitriol against Jews of any perspective, because now it's coming down to, it doesn't matter that you're a communist Jew. It doesn't matter that you're a secular Israeli. It doesn't matter that you are a non-practicing Jew of some kind. Everybody is pinpointing how Jews are problematic, not only because of their views, but because of their existence, because of their ability to claim the victim card. It's getting to the point of the time when the Inquisition was created to hunt down Jews who were reverting back to Judaism in the Catholic community, because now even a non-practicing Jew is a problem because he can always claim that he's being racially profiled. And then like Nazi Germany or right before, where anybody that has a drop of Jewish blood is suspect, like you were saying during our last interview, because they might be working for the enemy or they are some type of informant or double agent. That's how bad it's getting. And I'm not exaggerating, because of all the stuff that is coming up in social media, where any reason to demonize a Jew is game, just like it was during after 9/11. Any reason to demonize a Muslim was game, or a lot of us who are immigrants, they're using any reason to demonize immigrants because they're a problem to society, or because they're too successful, or they're not successful enough, or they come with weird ideas. So it's just open season on people that are not fully understood. So as I share this with you, Raphael, what comes to mind and what emotions are surfacing? Because I know it is a very tough subject to discuss.
David, thank you for having me on. Two things come to mind right now. I think first of all, excuse me, the place of nuance in our modern political discourse. Um, a lot of us, I'm sure, over the past couple, past several turbulent political years, have tuned into all sorts of political channels, and we've heard all sorts of political leaders political leaders and thought leaders making all sorts of statements. And sometimes we will hear statements that are very far to the right and sometimes very far to the left, whatever that might mean in a given context. And it's very rare that we hear somebody who has nuance, who can hold different perspectives at the same time. And I think you were sort of getting to this earlier. Um, eh, nuance is really the road less traveled, and for good reason. It's a road that's very hard to travel. I think you and I originally connected over the death of my brother, right? My brother had committed suicide a few years ago, and until today, sometimes I will talk of suicide, and some people will say, "Oh, you're being insensitive to people who have actually gone through suicide," and who actually have family members have gone through suicide, and it reminds me that first of all, it's ridiculous because I lost somebody to suicide. I'm not being insensitive, but I think just to speak with the necessary level of nuance that really such a sensitive situation demands is sometimes very difficult to achieve. And I do want to ask for forgiveness because I'm sure that at some point during this discussion, this very important discussion, I will be perhaps insensitive to the suffering on one side or the other, probably more the other side. And I'm happy for you to point it out when it happens. I do not wish to be insensitive. I'm just trying to acknowledge my own limitations in trying to approach this with the necessary nuance. Does that make sense, David?
Yes, and you don't have to worry about offending me. What I'm worried about is that, like I share with you privately, is that we become the standard. Any Jew with any opinion becomes the standard of a good Jew or a bad Jew, depending on the person's perspective. So right now, Dave Smith is a good Jew, and anybody that disagrees with Dave Smith is Satan, and that's all we got, because he comes across very reasonable, very sweet, very interested in the well-being of people who are suffering. So if you say anything that goes against that progressive perspective, or a Candace Owens, which in a lot of ways she's hated by everyone because she has undermined Black suffering, she has misrepresented um, Christianity, she's done a lot of evil in my eyes, but she's coming across as very compassionate, very interested in the well-being of Palestinian civilians. So now you have two people from the opposite side who are acting in a very angelic and saintly way, and then anybody that does not accept their perspective is problematic. So I'm not worried about you speaking your truth and sharing your perspective. I'm worried about how that can be misconstrued and seen as just a typical, merciless, almost hateful understanding based on the situation. So they asked Norman Finkelstein, is it okay for the Houthis to hate the Jews? Because in their charter it says, I hate the Jews. And he's like, well, my parents hated the Germans because everybody hated the Germans because they try to kill us. So I understand why they want to kill us, because we deserve it. Like that's how he justified Houthis' anti-Semitism.
That was actually a good Jordan Peterson voice right there. I know you were going for Norman Finkelstein, but but
But
yeah,
so anybody can justify anything. Like anybody can say, well, the reason that there was this guy that he hated Black people, and his friends were saying, well, the reason he hates Black people is because when he was in jail, he got beat up by them. And it's like, well, maybe he deserved to get beat up because he was a rabid anti-Semite and racist, and he was saying horrible things. So I can say that his beating up is justified, and then someone else can say that his hatred is justified. But at the end, both of those things are wrong. Nobody should get hurt for speaking their mind, and nobody should be that hateful to spread, a plague of hatred around. So it gets silly when it comes down to debates over who's right and who's wrong if we don't use an objective source. Go ahead.
Yeah, for sure. No, listen, I feel a lot of sorrow when I hear the things you're describing. A lot of sorrow because I think, listen, again, it's my own suffering, it's my own perspective. I understand that other people are suffering, but like you said, my suffering also deserves a place. I feel like the Jew has always been sort of the anti-chameleon, right? A chameleon, or not necessarily a chameleon, but there are animals that will change their color to blend in with their surroundings, um, in order to fade into the scenery, to be one with their surroundings, um, to get along, so to speak, with their surroundings. And the Jew has always been an anti-chameleon. Wherever the Jews have been, world values have been somewhere else, it seems. Um, we have been back. I can only speak from a historical perspective. Obviously, I'm very young. But uh, from what I can tell of history, Jews were persecuted at a time because we were a drain on the economy. We were poor and we were a drain on the economy. Then, when we became rich, well, we were successful and we were taking away all the resources, and then we were hated for that. We were persecuted for being stateless. When we were in Europe and we were among all these different lands, we were considered a pariah. We were a separate nation within other nations, and that did not find favor in other people's eyes. And then when we came back to our land, all of a sudden we're called settlers and colonizers. It astounds me that people used to tell Jews 80 years ago in Europe, go back to where you came from. And then when we did exactly that, we're once again being told, go back to where you came from, which is supposedly back to Europe, even though many Israeli Jews are not even from Europe. But it's, so all I can say is really at this point, I don't know what else to say. I don't know what else we can do.
Okay, so for our audience, we've done a whole series on trying to debunk hatred towards the Bible. And in religious circles, they'll say, well, there is a precedent for wiping out the enemy because the book of Joshua describes it as commanded by God. And you can come up with a million reasons why you would do that for your own protection, for future generations, and this and that. But what I have brought up is that as religious Jews, that both you and I are, to different levels, there is a mitigation of sacred texts, which is true in Christianity and in Islam, which is tradition and interpretation. So a passage that would say something that we as modern people would find despicable, such as destroy everybody in a town, and now they can even use it with Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that you save more lives trying to bring fear to the heart of the enemy versus fighting them head on or this and that. There is a Jewish debate. I don't remember the source, but there was two rabbis, and they were trying to figure out if that language was acceptable based on all the other things that the Bible mentions, such as God is being slow to anger, abounding in love, merciful to 1,000 generations for those that love Him, and similar passages. And they were saying that when you dealing with what's depicted in the Bible, which it wasn't a conventional war as we know it, it was a conquest that was based on theological premise. But then now with the archaeological stuff like that, they're finding out that there was a lot of other stuff going on. That you would never. There's three ways to look at it. You would take it as allegorical because of the ongoing belief that you do not blame the children for the sin of the fathers. So if an enemy is attacking you, and the adults are making the decision to want to destroy you, you you defend yourself against the adults, but the children and the women, the civilians have nothing to do with it. So you would never exert punishment on them because it's not that's not a value that God accepts. That's true. The second interpretation is that it was a limited situation based on the circumstances. That at that time, because they believed that idolatry was rampant in Canaan, that they were going to use this, for lack of a better term, shock and awe campaign to eradicate something that was harmful. It was like a plague or a cancer that would cause destruction to the Israelite people. But the Nazis could have said that about the Jews. The Christians could say that about the Muslims. That is a very dangerous claim to make. And then the third one was that it was never true to begin with. That it was just educational kind of trying to depict idolatry as so evil that that's what should happen. That doesn't mean that it actually took place. That it was rhetorical. That it was like a soliloquy of woes and hatred towards the behavior of the people there. But when it came down to the reality, you see in other books like Judges that they actually made deals with different people and they didn't eradicate anyone because it wasn't even militarily strategical to do that because they could have been overrun by the enemy or something like that. So when you hear religious folks or people who claim to be religious or claim to be conservative say wipe Palestine out of the map, speaking of Gaza or the West Bank, or turn it into a parking lot, or we rather get rid of these people instead of facing them because they're so evil or stuff like that. It takes away any of the nuance, any of the theological debate and conflict that we all struggle with, as you would think virtuous or people who are trying to be righteous, and it just becomes this tit for tat hatred that the other side is saying the same thing. They're saying, wipe everybody out, conquer the whole world. The Israel and the U.S. are Satan. All this like disgusting stuff that no one should ever say of another human being. And I believe that people who know the Bible and who live a life of pursuing holiness should never put up with that kind of language. They should immediately cry foul and say, wait a second, you can say that all you want, but it's going to backfire on all of us, and they're going to assume that we all believe what you're saying. Even if you justify it for military reasons, it's unacceptable and immoral for you to try to hide behind religion and say stuff like that, like the people that you hate from the other side.
Yeah, I want to address the point you brought up about the Bible versus, as you mentioned, I'm a religious man. The Bible is my rock. It's the law of God, and it's there's nothing like the Bible. But before that, I just want to take a stab at um, what you mentioned about hate. And I don't know if you did this intentionally, but it seemed from your words like there was a bit of a moral equivalency. You spoke about people who were calling to turn Gaza into a parking lot, and you spoke about those who were calling death to America and death to Israel. And I just want to say in this regard, ultimately, there's something that is evil, an evil act, and then there's an evil motive. And we have to distinguish between the two. An evil act can be done from a non-evil motive, or it can be done through an evil motive. And they're both, we should strive to prevent both of them. But if we're going to address them at the source, we need to at least know what the source is. We need to know where they come from. There were very few people prior to October 7th calling for Gaza, these hateful comments you described, for Gaza to be destroyed, obliterated, right? And what has happened is, I'm going to tell you about, it was, I think, a year and a half ago, where there was a boy whom I knew since the time he was 10 years old. Lovely boy, sweetheart, heart of gold, incredible, incredible boy. And after October 7th, we learned what had happened. He went out to fight in Gaza. And we have the power, we have the airplanes, we have the bombs to go in and just drop bombs on the whole thing, and we would not lose a single Israeli life. But we said if we do that, it would be immoral. There would be loss of Palestinian lives. And so we don't want to do that. Instead, we're going to send in soldiers and we're going to try to make precision strikes. Because of that decision, this boy, his name was Binyamin. He died. He died in Gaza. What happened afterwards in my community? He was a British boy, a boy from England. He had moved to Israel as a young boy with his family. What had happened in this community afterwards was there was an outcry of some people who wanted to go in and carpet bomb Gaza. And I will say this, and again, here's where the nuance comes in that I mentioned before. It was not from a place of hate. It was not from a place of the inability to suffer those who are different from us. It wasn't racism. It wasn't any of that. What it was pain. It was such pure pain. And you realize all these people around this family who lost their child, their own children were also in Gaza fighting for their lives. And so while I will never endorse a call to go and destroy all of Gaza, I have to say that we cannot call it hate, the people who say that. We have to call it pain. We have to call it what it is. These people are in so much pain that they can't see anything different. Whereas if we look at Iran, Iran is a nation who we never hurt. We never stepped foot on Iran until 2025. And this was a nation that set up in their equivalent of Times Square, they set up a clock counting down to the destruction of Israel. That, David, is hate. And that's very different from a family. I'm sorry, but I have to say this. It's not politically correct, but I have to say this. To a family that lost a child and says, we need to go in there and stop our soldiers from dying, is very different from a country who sits there with everything it could ever want and set up a clock in their Times Square and say, this is a countdown to the literal genocide of the people we hate just because of their identity. Now, I'm going to go ahead and address as well the Bible verses that you mentioned, as follows. You brought up Joshua, and the truth is we don't even have to look as far as Joshua. There are verses in Exodus, there are verses in Numbers, in Deuteronomy, that all talk something along these lines of, I'm going to be fully honest about this, about killing every person, right? We have in Deuteronomy, as well in Exodus, references to Amalek, which Piers Morgan has brought up quite a lot lately. Talks a lot about Amalek. And I wanted to set the record straight here, okay? Because here's the issue with this. You cannot judge Judaism by looking at only half of our holy writings. We believe very firmly as Jews that together with the oral law we received a together with the written law we received an oral law from God. And the written law is supposed to be elucidated and understood in light of the oral law that we have received. And the oral law often is debatable between rabbis. There's lots of dialogue about this. There's discussion when it says Amalek in the Bible. This is perhaps not even a reference to an actual Amalek, to an actual nation. Rather, it is a reference. The Nachmanides says this. He was a great Jewish sage who lived about 500 years ago, and he says this quite explicitly. It is a reference to any person who rises up with the intention of destroying Israel. This is who Amalek is. It's not a nation. It's not necessarily a group of people that have to be destroyed because of their identity. And why do I say this? This is a very important point to make, because if you look at the history, all you have to do to see what the Bible is, what is the Bible's nature, is to see what the Bible has inspired throughout the millennia, really, right? Other religions have bloody histories, rampages throughout Europe and Asia and the Americas and whatever it might be, of murder and rape and pillage. And I would just put it out there that, if you we can discuss the context of what happened in the last 80 years, but prior to that, if you look at Jewish history, it's been one of the one of the most bloodless histories of any nation. We did not go about conquering. We did not go about killing. Our approach was never, in fact, it is recorded in our Bible that we had the opportunity in Babylon. We had the king on our side, and he gave a decree that there's one day where the Jews can kill anybody they want. No questions asked. Carte blanche, however you pronounce that, a blanket excuse to kill whoever you want. And what did we do? We found, I don't remember the exact numbers, I think it was like out of the entire Eurasia continent that was under Babylonian rule back then, there were like 2,000 people whom we found that really, really hated us and wanted us dead. And those were the 2,000 people we killed. It doesn't say there, as you would expect if you believe Amalek in a literal way. It doesn't say, oh, and we found the entire nation of Amalek and we killed them all off, all their women and their children. That's not what it says. Because it's very clear from the Bible that Jews never were proud of committing genocide. This was never our approach. Our approach was always be loyal to the country that hosts you because they're your host and you need to be grateful to them. Our approach was always have mercy and compassion on those who are strangers in your land because you are strangers in someone else's land. These are direct Bible verses I'm quoting. And so ultimately, yes, you can judge us by our history.
Well, the reason that I make the equivalency is because they use the same verses and apply it to themselves. You know, when the Catholics came to the Americas, they saw themselves as the chosen people, and they saw themselves as eradicating idolatry by killing the Aztecs and burning all their stuff. The Muslim community uses and twists the passages to destroy Buddhist statues in Afghanistan, and the same would say for the Christians trying to hunt down the Jews throughout the centuries as trying to wipe down the enemies of Jesus. So it's easy for people to find it as a precedent that because the ancient Israelites did this, then we get to do it also. And then you get someone as irresponsible as Netanyahu to say that he's going to wipe out Amalek when, like you said, Amalek can be anybody who stands against the purposes of God. So the question becomes, and this is something that was...
I just want to correct you there. It's not anybody. Amalek is not anybody who stands against the purposes of God. And that's what separates us from Christians to a large extent and Muslims. Amalek is anybody who stands to destroy the people of Israel.
Okay,
it's a very important distinction.
Okay, so what they say is the people of Israel are those who follow God's commandments, and then they start finding Jews that are misbehaving, and they're like, well, they're not following God's commandments, so they're not the people of God. So you see how it just keeps on going in that direction. There was a guy on YouTube that said, on Facebook, that said, there are 4 commandments that are important to Jews. And he's talking to Christians, so he knows what he's doing. And he's like, do not covet anything from your neighbors. So he's already assuming that Jews are covetous towards Arab land. He says you're not supposed to steal, murder, or have an idol. So he says they're stealing houses and territory, they're murdering civilians, and they're idolizing the state of Israel above anything else. So again, our own scriptures are being used against us, and you and I are talking as the international Jew, as Hitler would call us. We're not talking only about Israel because we get all lumped in together. So when a secular leader of a country, now Trump is talking about God, which this guy has never talked about God before other than claiming he loves the Bible. They're all throwing God around like, wait a second, if you guys were actually godly and actually cared about the things of God, you wouldn't be as irresponsible with your language, and you wouldn't be saying things that are triggering. Like, you're triggering religious folks to say, oh, this guy is my boy because he prays, he talks about God. And then you're triggering atheists and people who are against religion to say, oh, so this is a holy war. And they keep saying, well, it's not a holy war, but it is, but it's not, but it is, because they say it's a holy war from the enemy to us, but it's not a holy war from us to them. And so it's a lot of sophistry, which at the end is going to get people hurt, because the guys wearing the yarmulke are you and me, not them. They might wear it when they light candles or something to get a photo op, but they're setting us up to be seen as people who are ruthless, who have no regard for morality as common world morality or global morality might be. And then there's the issue of we find comfort in the scriptures and the tradition of the Jewish people. The vast majority of the world claims we all agree on the UN Charter, or we agree on the laws after Nuremberg regarding war, and that's the thing that is becoming an issue. It's not is it justified to do this, do that, because the US has justified all kinds of stuff. Is in this particular situation, are people going outside of the common acceptable rules that we all agree on? So that's where it's getting really scary. And I have been telling people that Gaza is the Vietnam of our generation, but it has bigger implications than Vietnam, such as turning into World War III. And that's why so many people are angry right now with the assault on Iran, because now they feel that it was already a powder keg situation, and now it's being uh, getting more out of hand, and it could cause global war and nuclear devastation. What would you say to people that bring up those concerns?
Well, I think the laws of war are a terrible doctrine. And I mean, I can just explain why. It's very simple. Because when we have laws in a country, these laws are updated regularly based on the shift in dynamics of the situation. That's why we elect legislators. Um, in the United States, you elect congressmen every 2 years and you elect senators every 6 years. Here in Israel, we elect our Knesset every 4 to 5 years. We elect legislators constantly because the law is a doctrine that needs to constantly be shifting to reflect the dynamics of both the situation and our understanding of morality. And the fact that the laws of war were codified a long time ago and we're not able to update them, especially due to the fact that there are war criminals sitting in the United Nations who would help to write whatever changes we want to make to these laws. I think there's a very big issue with that. Ultimately, the issue with laws of war comes down to the trolley problem, right? Which, for those of our listeners who aren't aware of what the trolley problem is, it's one of the most famous thought problems in philosophy. If I have a train that is going down a path and it's about to kill 5 people, am I allowed to change the path of the train so that I will only go and kill one person? Right? And what's the problem? On the one hand, if I do nothing, it'll kill 5 people, it'll kill more people. If I interfere, I do something, I do an action, I'll save more lives, but then I'll have caused the death of somebody who wouldn't have died otherwise. And it's this famous problem, and the jury's still out on it. I think nobody has really come to a conclusive solution to this problem. And there are YouTubers, like podcasters like Alex O'Connor. Alex O'Connor regularly re-explores the trolley problem with all sorts of variations. It's wonderfully educational to watch. And I'll just say, war is, in essence, our very own trolley problem. And it gets really scary, right? It gets really scary because it means we are now making decisions of other people's lives. I don't mean we as in me, right? But I mean world leaders who are responsible for war are now making decisions over other people's lives. And well, do we go to war? Or do we not go to war, right? As Dave Smith said, when is killing people ever justified? Well, some of these world leaders might argue that if I'm going to go to war to save more lives than I'm going to kill, then perhaps the war is justified. This was the problem we had back in the 1940s with Germany, right? Neville Chamberlain said, "Peace at all costs." And then came in Winston Churchill and took the opposite approach and said, actually, no, we have to, if we want peace, the only way we're going to get it is we have to stop these people before they take over the world. And that was the debate throughout the first half of the 1940s. And it's coming up again. What do you do in a scenario where the only way to stave off evil is to go out and kill, is to go out and wage war? To have laws of war, I understand why it's necessary. I understand why it's important. But I also understand and appreciate why it's very, very difficult to implement on a practical level because ultimately the trolley problem hasn't been solved. And ultimately, many people's lives hang in the balance.
Okay, so back to godly principles and a biblical perspective on the world. So, you know that people can take this video and nitpick it, and they're like, "Oh, two Jews in their you know, privilege are trying to say, is it okay? Is it not okay for Israel to slaughter anybody they want, and then for Iran to fight back when they were, mind their own business or this and that, like." Everything can be misconstrued. So that's why for me it's important to have an objective source of perspective on
Okay, fair.
what would be the right approach. And of course, there's a pacifistic approach which a lot of religious groups would follow, and they would say, well, it's up to God to destroy our enemies. You know, vengeance is the Lord's. So then you just take a complete pacifistic approach. In the way that one of my rabbi friends would say, that is what the Hasidim of ancient times, 200 years before the Common Era, there was a group called the Hasidim, the pious ones, who said, we don't fight on Shabbat. We might not even fight at all. We're just going to wait for God to take care of it. And they were slaughtered by the Syro-Phoenicians. Was it the Syro-Greeks from, the story of Hanukkah? And then you had the ones who gave in and said, well, we're just going to become friends with the Greeks and they'll leave us alone. And then they took a pig and they took over the temple and they defiled it. And then there was the ones who some people would try to equate to the Israelis and said, we're going to fight until we get these people out of here. And they would fight on the holy days, on Shabbat or whatever, until the right time came for them to cleanse the temple and do the rededication, as the Hanukkah story tells us. So those are the three types of Jews that are out in the world. The ones who are like the liberal Jews, who want to appease the nations that come against Israel. You have the Nituri Karta and other pacifistic groups who are like, let's just give in or give up or wait for Mashiach to take care of the problem. And then you have the ones who are like, we're going to use human means to bring an outcome that brings survival and existence to our people. Um, the That would be an idealized perspective of the three different groups, and then you have everybody in between who might go back and forth. Um, I don't think it's fair for people to ask us to pick one perspective or another because circumstances are different. I know some people believe that there's miracles happening, that uh, the war with Iran or with Gaza has had some positive things happen and maybe God was involved or something. But we're not in biblical times where we could say, let history prove us right. We are in an existential situation, and this is where I would agree with you. Like in our last conversation, we're saying, what is there for us to do? There's a when Bill Maher had Benjamin Netanyahu on like 20 years ago, he said, they're used to us being weak. They're used to us being pushovers. They can't handle the Jewish people having an army. Uh, is that a sentiment that you agree with?
I think they just can't handle the Jewish people. I mean, like I said, when we didn't have an army, they hated us. When again, we have to define who we're talking about when we say they. There are many good people out there who are there are some people who love the Jewish people. There are some people who are neutral about the Jewish people, both of which are really quite acceptable. And then there are the people who hate the Jewish people. And that latter category, I think that hate always existed, whether we had an army or we didn't. There's definitely some frustration now that keeping the Jews deterred, keeping the Jews at bay isn't as easy as it once was. There's definitely an element of frustration amongst our enemies in that sense. But you spoke about how we're sitting here as Jews and we're discussing this and we're inflicting this on other people. And I'll just say that, you know what, David, if I don't know if I'm allowed to say this on air, but I think you've been openly critical, right, of some of the things that have been happening, and it's fine as Jews for us to disagree about this, um, and it's fine for us as Jews to have different opinions, and people have to be aware that that that's also the case. But ultimately, um, if we don't, if we as Jews don't have this conversation, um, if we don't try to hash out these issues, then it's really going to go nowhere. I on my YouTube channel when I was responding to Dave Smith, one of the things I said to him was that he has this privilege to sit in the United States and comment about a conflict that is far away from him, that bears no actual has no actual bearing on his life. And I said, what happens if you're wrong? Right? For you, it's this intellectual discussion about, well, um, perhaps we should do this, and it'll cause them to react this way, and it'll cause them to react that way. But what if you're wrong? Like, if you're wrong, my family suffers the consequences, not yours. And so I think those who are in the line of fire, those who live in the region, those who have connections, strong connections to the region, family or whatever it might be, those are the very first ones who should be having this discussion. Just like I saw a discussion between the Jubilee put out a thing lately in their Surrounded series where they had an Arab from Gaza who was sitting around campus protesters. And the campus protesters were arguing with him, and he was saying, "No, I want peace with the Israelis." And they were saying, "How can you want peace with the colonizers?" And at some point, he said, "Listen, you guys are all telling me," I'm paraphrasing, but he said, "You guys are all telling me that my family has to be the one to suffer in this fight against the colonizers. I don't want my family to have to suffer to fight the colonizers. I want peace. I don't care if they're colonizers or whatever they are. If we can find a road to peace, if we can find a path to peace, then that's the one I want to pursue." And I think ultimately, yes, it is incumbent upon us, you and I as Jews, and then also me and the Arab who comes to do construction in my building, and me when I go out and I provide service in my business to an Arab. I think it's incumbent upon all of us who live in the region, who have ties to the region. Yes, we are the ones who have to have this conversation because it's our lives at stake.
But what happened during the Iraq war is they said, well, we go fight them over there so they don't come fight us over here. And that same premise could be said like Israel proper has, borders and as peaceful of an existence as possible. And then you have the two disputed areas, and then you have the other Arabized or Arab countries. So then you could say, well, in your circle of influence, you have somewhat relative peace, and then there's all this other fires all around you. So you can say, well, there's a smoking gun over there. Some people are trying to kill us. And then the question is, how far do you go, like you're saying, to eradicate the problem? My biggest issue is the idea that the only way to deal with the problem is to dominate and humiliate the other group. I know that it sounds triggering to use those two terms, but that's the only way to really describe war. So we had technical difficulties and we're back on. Um, I'm gonna get Mr. Raphael back on in a minute. So in the last section, we were discussing what's going on with the the way work can be described. There's Raphael. So I was telling our audience that we had a technical difficulty, so this is going to be part two. How much time do you have available, Raphael?
I have time.
Okay, so in my presentation about the Inquisition, I was sharing that it's not uncommon for people to torture, to kill, to blow up stuff, to come after everybody's family. That's pretty much what war is all about. And the people who we can look at as who perfected war, if you can call it perfect, was the Romans. So I was sharing in a previous segment that war is about humiliation, defeat, and domination of the enemy. And that's why some pacifist groups would say the war is evil because it involves violence. So, as spiritual people, you and I are not Rambo. We're not people who, I'm sure that by the time you moved into Israel, did you have um, to serve in the military or not?
There is a mandatory draft in Israel with many exceptions, and I was one of the exceptions.
So because of our age, because of our religious commitment, because of our family, whatever, we can be excused from, having bullets being thrown at us. So when you're in the midst of a battle, everything changes. But the one thing that I find disturbing is that I worked with military veterans before and with families who've lost people in the military, and no one ever talks about the toll that it takes on those people who serve. And you could say the same thing about the so-called freedom fighters on the other side, or whoever is rising against anybody else. But so this aspect of having to inflict violence on others to protect yourself is a philosophical conundrum, because Jesus and Gandhi and MLK and all the pacifists would say, "I rather lay down my life than to take a life." Someone was just telling me about Hawkridge Bridge, the guy who refused to have a gun, and then he saved a bunch of people, and God helped him through his time in I think it was Vietnam. So how do you how can we say anything about war when we're not actively involved in it? And as religious folks, we evade having to make these big decisions. So then when we support someone going to war, aren't we also not allowed to make a decision one way or another because we have no say or involvement in the tough choices they have to make?
Well, I mean, for me, there's a very obvious answer. I very much have skin in the game. I don't serve, but all my siblings, all of my siblings, except for one, um, serve in the IDF. Um, my sister, um, my sister's brother-in-law was shot in Gaza. Thank God he was okay. He came home and he had surgery, and he's okay. His face will never look exactly the same, but he's okay. He's alive and he's healthy. Um, but listen, we live. My parents live with the understanding that any day they could have a knock on the door, and that will be, um, well, I don't know if I can say the most dreadful day of their life because they've already experienced the loss of a son, but it will definitely be, it will definitely be one of the most dreadful things they've ever experienced. And so all I can say is I've lost friends, I've lost neighbors, and I very well run the risk of losing family. This war is not easy for anyone in this area. It's not easy for any of us. And what we do is we pray together for peace. Um, when we talk about humiliating our enemies. I want to say something very important here, and that is when we abandon a form of battle, that is not peace. We are ceding that territory to those who will use it for evil. And as a man of God, I believe that it is our role to never let evildoers conquer any territory. Not, I don't want evildoers to take control of propaganda. I don't want them to take control of religion. I don't want them to take control of government, and I don't want them to take control of the battlefield. Because any one of those territories that we cede to evildoers will become a platform through which they can spread their evil and their hate and their terror, um, and anything they want, anything that they see in their twisted, sick minds to the rest of the world. And I'm not, please, I want to be clear. When I speak of evildoers, I don't mean the Palestinians, I don't mean the Iranians, I mean the sick extremists within these places who are fighting and who want to wipe us off the map and who call America the great Satan. Um, these are the people. These are the people to whom I will not cede the military territory. And you know what, David? I think there's a reason why God taught us in the Bible to be people of war. Because so many religions tried to run away from war. They tried to distance themselves from war. They tried to say, oh, we're pacifists, right? The problem with being pacifists is that the other side isn't. And the other side will win if you let them. Now, we are never, we do not initiate war. You know, some people might say that we initiated the war with Iran. I'd push back and say, well, Iran actually shot at us a massive barrage of ballistic missiles twice in the last year. Iran set up proxies on all of our borders and had them massacre us on October 7th. Um, and we had intelligence that Iran was preparing the third barrage of ballistic missiles against us. So not to mention the fact that they had a clock counting down to our demise while they were enriching uranium. So I understand all this is controversial and all this, and what can I do? We're controversial. But the point I'm trying to make is that if we do not take the fights to these people, it will take
Okay, Rafi, but the one thing you can do, and
fight
excuse
to us,
me,
and ultimately they will wipe us out, as we've seen countless times throughout history.
Rafi, the one thing
Before
you
we had
can
a
do,
Jew,
and I hate to put you on the spot, but can you do the one thing that people complain about the Muslim community after 9/11? Can you condemn religious folks from your perspective when they cross the line, when they say hateful and stupid things? Because some videos that are being used by anti-Semites right now are from um, Ms. Rafi, from other rabbis who say horrible things about Gentiles, say horrible things about Jews who don't agree with them, who are pretty much condemning everybody to hell, who doesn't agree with their particular perspective. Would you be bold enough to say that there are, um, there's people within our ranks, religious Jews, who are making things worse by the rhetoric and the way that they describe things? Or would you say, oh, well, there's good and bad apples and this and that? Because that's the thing that people complain about with the police, with the politicians, with the Muslim community, that nobody's willing to stand up to their own people and tell them, hey, man, you need to cut that out because you don't represent us.
yes, I will gladly condemn Jewish hate, Jewish extremism, but I want there to be two very important caveats to that, two very important asterisks. Number one is let us not develop a moral equivalency. Jewish hate has never done what Islamic hate has done. We have never called for the genocide and destruction of another people. And you could say, oh, Amalek, Amalek. Amalek has many different explanations in Jewish law, and we know that. We have never gone about on rampages talking about how other countries are Satan, or we have never had a dictatorial regime in our countries, throughout the history in which we lived in other countries, we were nothing but peaceful. And so I will say that, yes, I will condemn Jewish hate, but not in the same way that I condemn other forms of hate, because they are not equal. That is number one. Number two, my second caveat that I want to make here. Hold on. I'm sorry. Maybe you can edit this out. My 4-year-old.
No worries. When Raphael comes back, we're also going to talk about something that happened in our show a couple of years back, and I want to get his perspective. We are recording live for our YouTube audiences, and in the audio one, we can edit stuff out. But go ahead, Raphael.
Okay, I'm sorry. The second thing that I want to say about condemning Jews when they go too far is it's hard to give sweeping condemnations because of the misrepresentation of what some rabbis say. So I'll give you one example with Candace Owens, right, who you brought up before, who I have no love for Candace Owens, and it sounds like many people in the United States don't either. She has her following. She said something. She spread some terrible slander about a rabbi who is one of the most loving and incredible figures ever to walk this earth. He was Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, as he's known. And there are stories of the non-Jews in his community who didn't even know that he was the Grand Rebbe, because he would walk up to them and say good morning to them as little boys and treat them with respect and dignity. And this was a man whose love for every human being was supreme. And even those who disagree with him, me among them, I disagree with him fundamentally in some things. One thing I cannot deny is his supreme love for every human being. And Candace Owens brazenly went on to Piers Morgan Uncensored, and she spoke about him as somebody who is racist against Gentiles and somebody who is hateful towards people who are not Jewish. And so I will say this: when there is genuine racism and hate coming from rabbis, you mentioned Rabbi Mizrahi. I don't know enough about him, but from the little I've heard of him, I'm happy to condemn him. But we also have to be very careful with who we're condemning and which sources we are relying on for our information. And I'd say that there are many wonderful people such as Rabbi Schneerson who are being libeled against, and we do need to stand up for when their case is being presented falsely, being strawmanned.
Definitely, and that lady, she's I call her the Black Hitler because she won't stop. Like she doesn't realize that what she's saying is not only false, it's um, hateful to the point of leading people to do harmful things to others. There's actually a case that say that a young man was listening to her and went and attacked some people. So she needs to get her act straight if she wants to um, be like. That's the problem, is that free speech can lead to all kinds of stuff, and later on we can talk about the new laws against some of the free speech stuff like that. But one thing that happened on our show is that we had a friend of mine. He's a Reform rabbi, but he's very politically conservative. And we were having a conversation about Bernie Sanders. And I've been a Bernie Sanders supporter. He actually was in hot water over not wanting to call the assault on Gaza a genocide. A security test on the left that if you don't call it a genocide, then you are a baby killer yourself. But he still has some support from the left because he's trying to stop weapons to go to Israel, or trying to push some of his ideas out there. But so we were talking about Bernie Sanders and the issue that came up, and I want to see your perspective. We're still looking at it from a spiritual perspective, but it is important because words have meaning, and I think that if we're gonna condemn different ideas, we have to be consistent. So the issue of nationalism came up, and I asked Rabbi Tarlow, do you believe that one of the issues that is happening in Israel, this was 6 years ago, is that it's becoming nationalist? And he said, there is no nationalist Jews in Israel. And I'm like, come on, man. Like, especially now, you know, a guy was saying that Rabbi Kahana was murdered by Al Qaeda. I had never even heard that. Um, and there might be some truth to that, but um, the people that follow him still, or those who are ultra nationalists from the Israeli standpoint, are causing a lot of issues because they're not willing to compromise. They're not willing to um, respect or acknowledge that there are other people that want to live in the same piece of land. They have these very hard ideas that we might not agree with, but they're out there. And he was dismissing nationalism as even being a thing when we know that in the US, the nationalist folks are the ones that don't want to get involved in Middle Eastern wars. They're the ones that are very anti Semitic. And Ron Paul and all those guys are friends with the neo Nazis. So, in your perspective, um, is nationalism a thing in Israel that can be seen as positive? Like people have pride for their country, they love the principles that the country was established on. They all serve in the military willingly and stuff like that. Or is it something that it has become a dirty word and people don't want to acknowledge that it even exists? And then you have people who are ultra nationalists to the point where us versus everybody, and the way that we want to have this country. Um, we're even going to come after other people who don't agree with us within the same country.
Okay, this is a very sensitive point, and so I want to be very clear here. I don't want there to be room for error. How are we defining the term nationalist?
Well, then that's the thing, because when the Nazis took power, they mentioned nationalists as we're trying to bring the country back from the dust and the rubble. We're trying to be it's the fatherland. We want to love on this place and make it succeed. So I think that the two approaches to war could be, we're gonna destroy the other place and humiliate it, so then they don't never mess with us again, or we're gonna work with them and we're gonna help them democratize and become better, and then next thing you know, like Germany, they become more powerful and they destroy you. So nationalism is what the problem has been in in Gaza and in the West Bank, because it's a militant nationalism from the Arabic people, where they say that their nation should be supreme in that territory without making any compromises or accepting any truces or anything. So in the same case, that's why I'm making a distinction between ultra nationalism and nationalism, where it's just the nationalist movements of the 1930s were Zionism, Palestinian liberation, Jordanian kinship or
Yeah,
whatever.
there was definitely a degree of violence in the original, the Haganah and the Lehi back then. These militant organizations that helped to found, the Zionist state. I'll just say that when we talk about nationalism, there are two approaches to nationalism in Israel. One is Jewish nationalism, and another is Israeli nationalism. Right? It's really a question of who falls under that umbrella. So we have, for example. Um, and this is a discussion in Israeli society because on the one hand we want to be democratic. On the other hand, we also want to remain a Jewish state because if we have a non-Jewish majority, then we're right back to where we were in the exile, with other people having control over us and being able to do to us as they will. And it's really for our own survival. We are duty bound to maintain a Jewish majority in our country. That's really it's something we need to do for our very survival. But then it gets more complicated because there's a group called the Druze, right? The Druze. And the Druze are a group of people who really, they're their own small religion. They don't accept converts. And what they did is they really threw their lot in with the state of communities. They are very loyal, fiercely loyal. Until recently, there was a Druze man serving in on the Knesset in our parliament in the Likud party, which is Netanyahu's party. Um, they are fiercely loyal to Syria and began to prosecute some of the Druze in southern Syria. The Israeli Druze came to the Israeli government and said, "We've been very loyal to you all these years, and now it's your turn to give back to us. Please go rescue our tribesmen." And as Israelis, what we did was we conducted operations in southern Syria in order to extract Druze who were undergoing persecution by the new Syrians.
The internet has been kind of spotty, so we're gonna
I apologize. I'm back with you. I'm back with you.
no
And
worries.
so this,
The internet has been chopping up. So you said they're very um, involved with the U.S. Sorry, with the Israel, and Israel went in and brought people who were being persecuted by the Syrian government.
exactly, these Druze people, because they had thrown their lot in with the Jewish state, they had wholeheartedly um, become members of the state. And I think there are ultra nationalist Jews who are like, oh, even the Druze aren't part of the state. But many of us who have trouble accepting certain elements within the Arab world wholeheartedly accept the Druze because these are people who support the idea of the Jewish state. I think what it comes down to, David, is nationalism has been a pill um, that's been some people have very it's been like a drug, whenever people were down, it was the way to pick them up. We saw it in plenty in Europe in the 1900s. There's a little bit of it waking up now in the United States, and I don't want to get too much into American politics, but I'll put it this way. I've seen somebody from the intelligence community say that the Mossad is the hardest intelligence agency to infiltrate, to spy on, because the Mossad members are fiercely loyal. I think the picture that's being painted here is, yes, on the one hand, there is a loyalty to the state, a sense of, if not this state, if this state doesn't take care of the Jews, then nobody will. And so people are very, very intent um, to defend the Jewish state with all they've got and to maintain its Judaism, to keep it Jewish. And on the other hand, the extremist elements that you're mentioning, the Kahanists, they don't even sit on Knesset, right? There's one man in Knesset now, his name is Itamar Ben-Gvir, who really hijacked the Kahanist party and made it his own and got elected to Knesset. But Rabbi Kahana's students, they're named Baruch Marzel and Michael Ben Ari. They can easily be researched. They were the leaders of the party, and they said explicitly, Itamar Ben Gvir does not represent Kahanism. They're very upset at him that he's too soft. They call him. They say that he's too soft. So Kahanism is very much a fringe. Ultranationalism is very much a fringe, and ultimately, there is a healthy nationalism. There is a fierce loyalty to this state.
So you mentioned the difference between a Jewish state and an Israeli state, and we've had the peace activist you saw on my interview with him, where he says that he wants Israel to be a Jewish homeland, but not a Jewish state. And then recently, one of the YouTubers was saying, "Why the heck is the U.S. so loyal to Israel?" And everybody's quoting Ted Cruz, who's not the brightest person out there, but he very blindly said, I support Israel because I love Abraham, and people are
His
not
interview
able,
with Tucker.
yeah, and people are not able to make the logical conclusion that the children of Abraham are the Jews. And you can look at it in all different ways, but at the end, Abraham is the father of Judaism, the founder, and if you don't believe that, then you're nuts in my eyes, because even with converts, even with people who came from other nations and joined the Jewish people. Um, the idea that Abraham is, we call him Abraham Avinu. Um, so blessing Abraham is blessing his progeny, spiritually or physically. People are like, no, that's not true. The Apostle Paul said that the Jews were out, so the Jews are out. Muhammad said the Jews were not in line with God, so they're out too. So any evangelical that believes that the Jews are God's chosen people, and especially being the majority of the people in Israel, is nuts, and you shouldn't support Israel because of whatever. So the point that I was saying is that there was
I'm sorry to interrupt. I do want to say something about chosen people because it sounds very ethnocentric to an extent, and I just want to say, our attitude. I can't stress this enough. Our attitude as Jews is not we are the chosen people. Respect us. That's the exact opposite of our mission. Our attitude, our approach is we have a commandment to act in a way that the nations of the world see us as the chosen people. We are commanded to become the chosen people, to earn the title. And if we don't earn the title, we have no right to claim it.
and that's what I've been trying to communicate to people. There are people who are very judgmental, and they say, well, if you're not a religious Jew, you're not even a Jew. And there's people that say Jews have lost their way, so we're not even considering them to be sanctified by God or sacrosanct to God. And the state of Israel is just a nation like any other nation, and this and that. Okay, fine. But what this kid on YouTube was saying was that um, why support for a country to be only one religion when you don't ask that from Germany or Britain or the US? And in a lot of people's eyes, those countries are Christian countries. In Ireland, it actually, on their constitution, it says we are a Catholic country or whatever they are. So, and same with the Islamic countries all around you guys. So that's people are still confused because I believe that the Jewish community created a lot of problems in the 60s by trying to claim themselves as a race when Judaism in itself is a religion by most accounts, but is more of a people. Or that's where the idea of even being a nation gets confused, because like in Hebrew you would if you don't mind, let me finish. In Israel, there's difference between Kalal, between Medinat, between there's another term for just Jews in general. So everybody gets confused on what being Jewish is and who's Jew and where do they live and all this stuff. So can you help us clarify some of that?
Gladly. The English language, although it contains the words to describe these distinctions, these words have fallen to an extent out of use because they haven't been relevant for so long. Um, the Jewish people are not necessarily a race, and we're not a religion. Like you said, I think you sort of put your finger on it. We are, in fact, we're not even a nation, in a sense. We are a nation, but we're also meant to be a conglomerate of nations, right? As God tells us, um, I don't remember, it might be Leviticus, I have to look again. But God says in the Hebrew, Kahal Goyim, right? A conglomerate of nations. We're supposed to be multiple nations that come together for a common cause. And that was what happened with the 12 tribes. The 12 tribes, if you look at the Bible, each one functioned as its own little nation, right? Each one had their own courts, their own leaders, presidents. Each one functioned in their own sort of capacity. But what united the 12 tribes of Israel was this common cause that we were devoted to. And in that sense, you could say, well, yes, it was 12 nations, but it was also one nation. But then you bring converts into the picture, right? We, unlike the Druze, which I mentioned earlier, the Jews have always been open to receiving converts. Anybody who wants can come under the umbrella of the Jewish nation. In fact, you can join the Jewish faith without joining the Jewish nation as well. which is a separate topic. That means you have fewer commandments, but you have to live a certain way. There's a whole discussion about how that works. But the bottom line is, and this is very important, we um, we're not a race, like you said. Anybody who wants to be a Jew, our doors are open, and it's you only have to choose to do so.
Yeah, but in the Bible they call them an am, which means nation, correct?
The Bible uses a few different terms, right? Am is used in one place, goy, which also means nation. We call people think that goyim is a derogatory word for non-Jews. All it means is nations. In the Bible, the Jews themselves are referred to as a goy. Um, we're referred to as kahal goyim as well, a conglomerate of nations. So there are different terms used in the Bible to describe different aspects of us, and it can all be taken. However it needs to be taken based on the context. Um, uh, and so, but we'll bring it back to the state of Israel for a second, and that is, you had mentioned about these other countries that don't necessarily have a religion as part of their national identity. And the truth is, it is becoming a bit of a question in Europe whether or not that's a good thing. I know there are discussions now about the demographic change in Britain, as an example, how there's a growing Muslim population, and some people feel uncomfortable with that simply because, and I'm not defending their discomfort. They're saying, listen, we had a culture here that we were familiar with, and now the culture is becoming unfamiliar to us. And so, is that something that we want to? What happens if we become a Muslim majority state? It means our lives are different. It means our government is different. It means the priorities of our society are different. And so, again, I'm not taking a side there, but I do want to express that the demographic issue is being discussed in multiple countries, and it becomes an issue in Israel, where you have people that has been persecuted by almost every single nation where we have ever lived. I mean, other than maybe the United States and Australia and like New Zealand, but almost every single country that we have ever lived in has persecuted us. And so the idea that your other guest that you had on, uh, likes to talk about, or that Gideon Levy, who's a very well-known Israeli journalist, likes to say that you can either be, he says in his thick Israeli accent, he says you can either be Jewish or you can be democratic. You cannot be both, right? And my response is, well, you can either have a Jewish state or you can have dead Jews. You can't, um, and that's the decision that we have to make.
Okay, so I'm gonna say something, and I want you to work with me because this would be the most common argument against the state of Israel staying Jewish, um, especially with what's going on. So Pilkenstein would say that de facto, Gaza and the West Bank have been annexed by Israel. The moment you start allowing settlements and you count the settlements as part of Israel, the moment you build roads and you protect the people there against the population that was already there that is not Jewish, you are slowly, occupying, not only occupying, but like taking over these places. Um, so you're giving us a catch 22. You're saying we cannot survive as a Jewish nation if our population changes, but there's millions of people in both Gaza and the West Bank, and we don't want a two-state solution. So what's the only other way to address that? Either to expel them or to kill them. So how do you want the rest of the world to be able to consider what Israel is doing with all the incursions and the occupations in 67, all that, to be in any way possible to survive? Like the only way that I see Israel surviving is becoming a military state and controlling everyone and their moves and keeping people in one area or another, because there's not enough Jews to go around and the Muslim population not going anywhere and they're growing. So it would end up being a very gruesome conflict and unjust situation to try to get people unearthed from where they are at. And neither group accepts each other's existence. So, like, what are we talking about?
Well, to say we don't want a two-state solution, I mean that's a heck of a statement to take for granted, right? Um, with all due respect to Norman Finkelstein and his enormous place in this world, it appears to me that in what he's saying, he is taking advantage of a lack of awareness of how things work in this region, right? And that is that there are really three types of areas that we're talking about here. There is what's called Israel proper, which is the pre-67, pre-1967 borders of Israel. And that is, there is a clear Jewish majority there, but with full rights to the Arab citizens. The Arab citizens vote. The Arab citizens serve on our parliament, on our Knesset. There are Arabs who serve as judges on our courts. There are Arabs who serve in our military and on our police force. There is absolutely zero apartheid of any sense happening in the pre-1967 borders. And for anybody to suggest that Arabs are second-class citizens there is absolutely ludicrous, completely and utterly ludicrous. The contention begins when we start to talk about the other two areas, right? There's a second area that is the post-1967 borders that is in sort of a a military rule at the moment, in the sense that Israel never officially annexed it. We're holding on to it. There are calls within the more right wing sectors of our government to annex this area, and there are calls in the more left wing segment of the government to give it back. And I think the centrists are more like, listen, we're happy to hold on to it for now until we feel it's safe for us to give it back. For now, we don't feel safe drawing our borders so close to our capital cities. But what happens is that within this territory, um, there the lines become a little bit more blurred in terms of um, in terms of hold on one second. I'm trying to remember what I was saying.
There's two different, and this is what Smith was
Right.
saying. He was saying that there's two types of law. There's the law of Israel that is applied to the settlers, and then there's military law that is applied to the Palestinians on their occupation.
So
And the,
so right. So I want to say something about that, and that is that there's a third area within this, and that's called the Palestinian Authority. Okay, that there's Israel pre-1967, there's Israel post-1967, and then there's the Palestinian Authority. Okay, this is very important because people who talk about the region really don't understand how this works. The Palestinian Authority does take up a sizable chunk of the land between the river and the sea, a sizable chunk of land of what people call biblical Israel. And they have their own government in place. There is a governing body in the Palestinian Authority that we have zero control over. There is zero Jewish control over the Palestinian Authority. And I want to make that very clear. And they had their own elections until their leader canceled elections and made himself a dictator. It's not because we don't allow them to have elections, it's because they don't allow them to have elections. In Gaza, they had elections until Hamas took over, and Hamas made themselves the dictators. It's not because we don't allow Gaza to have elections, it's because Hamas doesn't allow Gaza to have elections. Now, there is a point of contention with these territories, and that is as follows. That yes, on the one hand, they have their own sovereignty, and they have their own rule, and there's no reason why they should have any complaints to Israel about that. The one place where Norman Finkelstein and people like him come in and say, well, listen, it's really not fair, is that the Palestinian Authority in Gaza, they don't have an airport. We don't allow them to have an airport. We don't allow them to have free trade coming through our borders over to them. We limit who can go in and out of Israel from these spaces. And so they come and say, listen, you may not actually have governmental rule over these areas, but you are closing them in. And I understand where he's coming from. My response to people like Norman Finkelstein in this regard, and again, I just want to put this up there, right? Just to remind people, we have We have the area that is completely under Israeli control, where Arabs have full rights. We have a secondary area, which is a mix of Arab and Jewish settlements that has a sort of military rule, and the settlements sort of the Jewish settlements vote in Israel, the Arab settlements vote in the Palestinian Authority. It's a little bit confusing. And then we have the Palestinian Authority, which is its own area with its own government. And I'll just say this about the Palestinian Authority is that we have in the last, how long has Israel existed now? Almost 80 years now. In the last almost 80 years, we have gone a long way towards peace with some of our neighbors. So we used to be at war with Jordan and Egypt, and today we have peace with Jordan and Egypt. We have people crossing over the borders into Egypt, back and forth. We have complete peace with Jordan. We've never had any issues with them since, in the last 50 years or so, we haven't had issues with them. The countries that we have issues with are the ones who state explicitly that they want to destroy us. And that's where the Palestinian Authority falls. The Palestinian Authority they have in books, in their schools, propaganda that demonizes Jews. The Palestinian Authority, they pay salaries to terrorists. This is well documented, by the way. You can do this. You can learn this from a quick Google search. Any terrorist who comes onto Israeli soil and kills Jews and sits in a Jewish prison, in an Israeli prison, for killing Jews, the Palestinian Authority will pay him a salary so that his family is well taken care of. Now, you might say, well, of course his family should be well taken care of, but they don't take care of the families of thieves. They don't take care of the families of people who've committed sexual abuse. They don't take care of the families of people who are in jail for corruption. They take care only of the families of people who were arrested in Israel for murdering Jews. The Palestinian Authority is quite complicit in the open terrorism against the Jewish state. And that is why we are very cautious about who comes between the borders. That is why, by the way, although there are many Jews living many Arabs living within the borders of the Israeli state, of the Jewish state, there are no Jews living within the borders of the Palestinian state because it's not safe. And so all I'd say is this. Yes, I do think that the Palestinians should have full rights to have an airport, to have a seaport, to have more expansive borders. But if they're asking for us to grant it to them, we need to know that they're not going to take advantage of that to destroy us. And so for all we're seeing from the Palestinian Authority and all we're seeing from Hamas is that they want to destroy Jews. And I'll just add one more thing, and that is that Egypt also shares a border, and I pointed this out in one of my videos on my channel, is that Egypt also shares a border with Gaza. Egypt imposes harsher restrictions on Gaza than the Israelis do. Until October 7th, we allowed Gazans to come into our borders and to work within Israel in order to take their shekels back into the economy and strengthen the Gazan economy. Egypt allowed no such thing. Yet for some reason, the people that the government of Hamas is openly calling to annihilate, we're the ones who are responsible to give them these rites of passage. But the country that is more ethnically similar to them, who has no war with them at any point, nothing is expected of them. How can that be? And that's why I think that there's a lot of injustice in the region.
Okay, you mentioned that during the last interview that we did a week ago, but the one thing that would be brought up was, well, Egypt is getting paid by the U.S. not to fight Israel since the 80s. And then Jordan is getting paid also. So everybody's just looking out for themselves, and they're willing to throw the Palestinians under the bus to have peace with the U.S. and with Israel. So that would be the first contention. The second contention is that you mentioned the PLO being pro-terrorism, but you and I know that some of the nationalist groups that later on joined the state of Israel when it became independent and now got integrated into the IDF were also committing acts that some people consider terroristic against the British and other groups. So very quickly they can flip it on you and say, Well, Hamas is doing what Hamas can do. PLO is doing what the PLO can do based on their oppressive experience, that they don't have a big army, they don't have the equivalent of what Israel has to be able to push their agenda. How would you respond to that?
My response would be that if you want a country to stop being at war with you, you need to show goodwill, that you were interested in peace. Jordan and Egypt, you're saying they're being paid off, which it could be, but ultimately it worked. They showed us their goodwill, and we're no longer at war with them. When a country has under charter, which Gaza has, because Gaza is ruled by Hamas, if they have under charter that they want to destroy every Jew in the world, not just Israel, but every Jew in the world, then I would say there is no sense of goodwill. There's no sense of goodwill. There's no sense that there's a partner here with whom to have peace. And you know where I saw it? I saw it in that Jubilee debate, David, where I saw the people who were coming forward and saying, don't make peace with Israel. They are a colonizing state. There should be one state between the river and the sea, and it should be a state of Palestine. And people talk about, it's a shame. The people who call for a one state solution, a Jewish state, receive a lot of attention. The Palestinians who call for a one state solution don't receive as much attention. And I'd say that Netanyahu is a man who has spoken multiple times of wanting the two-state solution. But the Hamas and the PA have never spoken of a two-state solution. They've spoken of a one-state solution. They've spoken of complete dominance of the Palestinians between the river and the sea. They've spoken of getting rid of the Jewish settlers, the Jewish colonizers who live in the region. And I'd say, if that's your goal, as long as that's your stated goal, how do you expect me to make peace with you? How do you expect me to make peace with a charter that calls for my annihilation, that calls for me to be expelled from my homeland? And ultimately, that leaves me once again to wander among the nations in the hope that my next stop won't kill me, the same as any other nation has done to my ancestors throughout history.
And for those who will say that Hamas doesn't really say that they want to kill the Jews, this is what according to Yale School of Law, this is what the Hamas Charter of 1988 says. Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam will obliterate it, just as it obliterated others before it. And it mentions a martyr named Imam Hassan al-Banna. So again, we have the confusion between, are they talking about literal Israel, the Jewish people as most people know it, or the state of Israel, or anybody who has a Zionist desire to live in the land. So it can be, overall, since you guys believe that is the Jewish state, then everybody who's Jewish who lives there is Israel. And then there's anybody who supports Israel becomes a Zionist and also is open to being massacred.
Yeah, but I don't think, David, that it really matters because, as I said before, if your solution is that there's no longer a Jewish state, what you're doing is condemning the Jews to whatever fate the other nations will mete out to them. And so, you can say, well, we're only against the Jewish state, we're not against the Jewish people. It makes no difference to me. If your solution for me is that I'm going to live among the nations that have tried to kill me multiple times throughout the millennia, that to me is unacceptable. And I will fight for my right to live in my indigenous homeland. But I think there's one more point that needs to be made here, and you spoke about before how the United States is paying Jordan and Egypt for peace. You know who's paying Gaza? Who's paying Hamas? Iran is paying Hamas. Iran, the state that has, I mean, like I said, this is unbelievable. I mean, I remember when I read the headline that we bombed their clock that was counting down towards the end of the Jewish state. And somebody pointed out, they're like, guys, the headline is not supposed to be that we bombed a clock. The headline is supposed to be that the clock existed in the first place. I mean, the fact that they have in Tehran a clock that's counting down to the death of the Jewish state, and they're the ones who are funding Hamas, should tell you that yes, this is a group that is bent on ridding the area of the Jewish state. And again, I just want to point out one more thing, and I want to ask, who cares more about the Arabs in the region, about the Palestinians? Is it the United States that is putting in money for the sake of peace, or is it Iran that is putting in money for the sake of war and is bringing out the deaths of both Jews and Palestinians?
Yeah, but people would say that now the government of the U.S. is supporting exile, something that Jews have experienced throughout the centuries of the population of Gaza, and they want to move them to Jordan, to Syria, to Egypt, to make room for casinos or whatever Trump wants to push. Um, it I know it's a lot to put on you to speak on behalf of the Israeli people, but when you heard that outrageous idea, how did you react?
Um, but listen, it's hard to know with Trump because he works a lot with game theory, right? So he'll propose something completely outrageous with the intent of meeting you somewhere in the middle. It's what he's done before. I mean, I don't know. Again, I'm not an expert on American politics. I don't even want to start to think about what was going through Trump's head when he said that. It's I'll let other people speak to that. For me, what went through my head when they spoke of the idea of evacuating the Gazans from Gaza, what I felt from that was that it should be done through it should be done through choice. I think Gazans should be given the option to leave Gaza. Because if we look at what happened in Ukraine, when the Russians attacked Ukraine, many Ukrainians chose to leave Ukraine for the foreseeable future because Ukraine was not safe. And the most humanitarian thing that we can possibly do was to provide a corridor for these people to leave the war zone and to take their families somewhere safe. And I know, yeah, I just so happened to run a chess club here in Israel, and we had a lot of Ukrainian chess players who all of a sudden our chess club was empty because all these Ukrainians were flying out to Ukraine to bring their parents and their cousins out of Ukraine to help them get over the border to somewhere safer. Um, this was the reality. This was the reality back then. And I can't imagine why anybody who wants good for the Palestinians, who wants life for the Palestinians, will not enable those who choose to leave through a humanitarian corridor. Now, I know you can say, listen, some people are going to hear me say this, are going to be like, oh, it's easy for you to say. It serves your interests. You Jews want to go in there and take over the place. And please, I mean, spare me. At this point, we have no interest in taking over Gaza because we've lost, the figure was published today, we've lost almost 1,000 soldiers. And this is besides for October 7th. We've lost almost 1,000 soldiers, young men my age and younger, in this war. Nobody wants us to take hold of a reluctant group of militants and combatants who are living in Gaza indefinitely. We don't want that. Nobody here wants that. And so all I want is I want those who want to leave to be able to leave, to have that option.
Okay, but the moment that someone leaves, then the place gets taken over, and then they're not able to come back, and that's the fear and some of the um, resentment that happened in lower Israel when people were pushed into Gaza during the first couple of wars that took place. So the I condemn it wholeheartedly as the stupidest thing that anybody has ever proposed, because it would be worse than Vietnam. You have people who are so entrenched, not only emotionally and physically in that area, but you have people who are now have complete, like, even though martyrdom is such a lofty thing for a lot of people in that culture, now they definitely have um, nothing to live for other than sticking it to the other side because they're being fully occupied and fully taken over. And it would be, more slaughtering of innocent people and militants and everyone. And they wouldn't go willingly or accept their lot at all. So it would just cause more pain, more destruction, and as I was mentioning before, complete devastation to the military personnel, American and Israeli, who would be involved there. I don't know if you've seen they made this weird movie, which is it's like animation of the siege of Lebanon in 1980. It's an Israeli film.
I
Uh,
didn't see it.
it it's about the toll that it took just to see the Lebanese army murder the Palestinians, and how the Israelis didn't get involved, or they were involved in limited ways, and how it was still affecting people in the 90s and 2000s. So to think that the war in Gaza is not going to cause that much emotional suffering and traumatic experience from the troops, on top of the traumatic experience from the civilians in Gaza, on top of the militant people that also we would pray they would be redeemed somehow, that they would find the light and stop using violence as their means to express themselves. Like all that, none of that stuff ever is discussed by presidents who play dangerous games with people's lives, and that's why I have so much disdain for Trump and Netanyahu for being so flippant about people's ongoing lives, because it's not just the people that are dying, the people who are suffering, it's the impact that it's going to have for um, tens of years. Like it's going to be trauma that cannot be cured. It might be able to be mitigated through a loving environment, but it cannot be fully restored. Once you start a powder keg of a situation like that, it is going to hurt people for a long, long time. And there is a lot of trauma in the Jewish community from the Holocaust and other persecution in the Middle East, and from the people who were caught in the middle of the wars between all the Arab nations against Israel when they were became independent. How would you, as a spiritual person, um, respond to those concerns that I have of just saying, "Oh, just kick them out, or just throw them over there, or just move them around"? Like one of the oldest churches in the Middle East is in Gaza, and it got bombed recently. We can't just act like that's no big deal.
David, I appreciate what you're saying, and it sounds to me like you're speaking from a place of pain. I think I can hear that in your voice, that you feel that what's going on does not represent you, and you're pained by it. And I mean, you can call me out if I'm wrong. That's what it sounds like when I listen to you speak, and I appreciate that. Listen, as somebody who lives here, all I can tell you is that it is beyond frustrating. I said to you before that the Jews are the anti-chameleon, and we see it here. Though it seems like the only solution that people will have us implement is to sit back and let them execute another October 7th. That is the only solution, because we can't. You don't want us to evacuate them to somewhere that's more humane, somewhere where they'll have a better life. You don't want us to go in there and affect a regime change. You don't want us to. I mean, what's the solution? What is the solution? And this is what it really comes down to. There's a very big problem in the Gaza at the moment. The problem is that there are all these people living under. One second.
So
There we go.
we're
I have to turn on the
discussing
light.
with Raphael
There,
Gantshar. Final comments before we end our second show. Go ahead.
sure. There are a lot of people living in Gaza, living under Hamas, that are faced with the following predicament. Hamas is a country that survives off of international aid. The problem is that those who seize the international aid are the terrorists. And then they sell it back to the people living in Gaza. And their price is you have to join the organization and you have to become terrorists yourselves, because otherwise you will not be able to afford to buy food for your family. And this,
Hold on, Raphael. You mentioned that during the last show, and I know a lot of people are going to say that that's propaganda and that just came up. They had never said that until recently, when there's not enough aid going in. But there is, if you look up anti-Hamas Palestinians who now live abroad in Germany and in France, they would say similar things, and they would say that the majority of the population does not support Hamas, and they've been hijacked to the point of being by the gun being told to support them. And all the ones who have protested against Hamas, they've been jailed or killed. So what
Right.
you're saying correlates with what anti-Hamas Palestinians are saying. Go ahead.
Right. Well, there's that's correct, and there are several very well establishable facts on the ground in Gaza. Number one is that there's enough aid going in there to feed the people of Gaza. Number two is that the people are hungry and the people are starving. And number three is that number three is that there are many innocent Palestinians who just want peace, and number four is that Hamas ranks are always growing. How do you reconcile these four facts? And all I'd say is there are two paths forward. Either you can believe that the Gazans are inherently evil and uncurable, or you can believe that they're being forced into serving Hamas, that they're being forced into it and they have no other choice. Those are your two options.
Well, then
I
it could also
come
be that the Israelis are not allowing aid because they want to starve the people. And there's been videos of religious Jews trying to block the aid, and so a lot of the military officials have said that they will shut down aid because they want to uh, get people to the breaking point so they rebel against Hamas. So a lot of things can be true all at once.
listen. I understand what you're saying. All I can say is that all these conspiracy theories about what directives have been given to our soldiers, what to do and not to do to the Gazans. Some people say that there are orders to shoot innocent Gazans. Cenk Uyghur says stuff like that. I mean, that there are orders just to shoot innocent Gazans, there are orders to starve Gazans, there are orders. There has not been until today a single whistleblower who has named a single commander who has given such orders. In any evil military in the world, where they do evil things to other citizens, we always find one person who we can say he gave the order. Somebody up top or somebody relatively low. There has not been a single name in the Israeli military or in the Israeli civilian command of the military that we can point to say he gave the order to shoot the Gazans. So all I can say is, listen, there are conspiracies and there are theories and there are all sorts of things. But I ask you, what is the path forward to peace? And the path forward to peace is, and by the way, my siblings are soldiers and they've never received such an order and they would never execute such an order if they received it. Just so you understand. I'm not just saying this as a theory. I know what's happening on the front lines. And I can tell you that we have to have some way out of this. The international community cannot keep coming to us and telling us you can't evacuate them. You can't withhold aid that goes straight to Hamas and allows them to radicalize, enables them to radicalize their fellow Gazans. You can't go in and affect regime change. You can't. And what does that leave us with? To roll over and die? What does that leave the Palestinians with? Endless wars? And what I would say to you, David, is people need to have the option. People need to have the freedom to choose. And if your stance is against choice, if your position is that we will not allow the Palestinians the choice to leave Gaza because we want them to be there on our front line and fight our holy war for us, then you don't care about the Palestinians. I don't mean you, David, but I mean anybody who comes and has this position. There needs to be an end to this. There needs to be a way out, and every person needs to be able to choose to do what's best for their family. And if you want the Palestinians to stay within the Gaza, then you are no less guilty of the open air prison than the Israelis whom you believe are inflicting it on them.
Okay. Do you know who Bezalel Smotrich is?
I do. I know very well who Bezalel Smotrich
Okay.
is.
So when CNN says that he said it would be just and moral to starve 2 million people in Gaza, is that not a statement that is condemnable and that goes against what you're saying?
Okay. First of all, I don't know whether or not Bezalel Smotrich said that, because as far as I'm concerned, I've seen CNN misreport many things that Israelis have said, and so I'll take a CNN report with a grain of salt. If Bezalel Smotrich indeed said that it's justifiable to starve 2 million people who live in Gaza, then yes, I condemn that. Yes. I very much prefer the option of giving them a way out and allowing them to bring their families to a different country of their choosing where they can live and prosper. Or I prefer the way that Netanyahu is currently implementing, which is we are bringing humanitarian aid in, but not through the UN organizations which have been proven to have been infiltrated by Hamas, but through an American company, the Gaza Humanitarian Fund, the GHF, and they are the ones to distribute the aid in a way that it does not come into the hands of Hamas, but it comes into the hands of the people who so badly need it. Those are the two approaches that I support.
So let's say that a Christian Palestinian that lives in Gaza, who's friends with some of the hippies and peace activists that were murdered on October 7th, said, "I want to come live in Israel. I'll bring my family, and we'll be peaceful, loving people, and we can work on our papers while we're at it." How would you respond to them?
I would respond that unfortunately we cannot receive immigrants from an enemy country while we were at war because this is how spies infiltrate and threaten our national security. This is how terrorists have come into our country and have killed our citizens. And I mean, listen, it, any country that is at war with another country should not be expected um, to take in people from that country. That is why when Ukraine was under attack, the Ukrainians did not go to Russia. They went to the neighboring countries. They went to other countries in the area. When there is a war in Africa like this one that just ended between the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda, the people who were fleeing their country did not flee to the country that was attacking them, but they fled to the other countries around it, because that is unfortunately the way it needs to happen in war.
Okay, well, we want to thank you for your honest approach, and for our audience, we just want people to know that not everybody on either side is a rabid lunatic that wants to destroy each other. Everything that our friend Rafi has shared is reasonable from his own perspective, and you can email us at mysticandskeptic@gmail.com with complaints and concerns about the information that we've shared, but we're trying to do our best to humanize Israelis, because as much as you would think is ridiculous and that they get a lot of airtime on conservative radio, as you guys have seen, having a peace activist and just a normal citizen of the state of Israel with our guest today, they're people, they have same concerns, same fears and dreams as anyone else. So we don't want for people just to assume, like the report from Penn State that says that 90% of Israelis want to murder Gazans, which I found disgusting and evil from Haaretz to put that out with no caveats, no explanation, no access to the raw data or the people
And
that
just
they,
false.
yeah.
Yes.
So, like I said in the last interview, maybe they're trying to stop the war by freaking everybody out and making everybody hate Israelis, but it is very counterproductive and leads to more anti-Semitic hatred. So, you've been a great like a good sport putting up with my questions, but again, we just want people to know that there are many people out there that want peace as well, and in a complicated situation like this, we're trusting that our leaders would do the right thing, but we have to hold them accountable as well. And we thank you for your ability to take on these challenges, because it is a lot. Do you want to share with the audience how they can find you on YouTube?
Sure thing. Well, I appreciate your dialogue with me on this matter. And ultimately, we'll arrive at peace when we can have this dialogue and when we can disagree and we can hopefully come to an understanding in this region. I invite if any people who take the Palestinian side want to engage in a dialogue with me, or any people on the Israeli side want to engage in a dialogue with me, I'm open to do so. No strings attached. My YouTube channel is Israel a People, and there we go through the understanding behind the Israeli side. Some might call it propaganda. I call it our narrative, and only through hearing the multiple narratives then you can draw your own conclusion. And you can email us at israelapeople@gmail.com. And we will be happy um, to respond to your questions, your comments, and perhaps we'll make videos out of them as well.
Thank you so much. For our audience, thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of Mystic Skeptic Radio.